Imagine waking up and everything is exactly the same. The same alarm tone cutting through the same morning silence, the same slant of light through the same window, the same smell of coffee drifting from the same kitchen. At first it sounds almost peaceful, like a life with no surprises, no chaos, no uncertainty. But what happens when that sameness is not a choice? What happens when the loop never breaks, when tomorrow never actually comes, and the only day you will ever live again is today? This is not just a thought experiment pulled from science fiction. It is one of the most revealing psychological and philosophical questions a human mind can sit with. Because the way you answer it says everything about how you are actually living right now. The question is deceptively simple. If you had to live the same day forever, what would that day look like? And more importantly, could you survive it not physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually? The answers take us somewhere far deeper than most people expect. In the beginning, most people would probably feel a strange kind of relief. No deadlines looming over the horizon, no consequences that carry forward, no bills due next week, no difficult conversations you have been putting off for months. You wake up, the slate is clean, and whatever you did yesterday technically never happened in any permanent sense. There is a seductive freedom in that idea. You could eat whatever you want, say whatever you feel, take risks you would never normally take, because none of it sticks. The first loop might feel like a vacation. The second might feel like an extended weekend. By the 10th repetition, something starts to shift. The food that tasted incredible on day one starts to feel mechanical. The conversation you had with someone you love starts to feel like a script you are reading rather than a moment you are living. The novelty drains out of everything with a speed that is almost violent. And this is where the real experiment begins, because what you are left with after the novelty disappears is the raw, unfiltered texture of the day itself. No anticipation of tomorrow to carry you forward, no memory of yesterday to give you context. Just this, just now, just the same 24 hours, cycling endlessly like a record that never moves to the next track. Psychologists have long studied what happens to the human mind when it is deprived of progress. One of the most fundamental human needs is the sense that time is moving forward, that effort leads somewhere, that today's actions build towards something tomorrow. Strip that away entirely, and the psychological consequences are severe. Studies on monotony and sensory repetition show that the brain begins to rebel when it cannot detect meaningful change. Motivation collapses. The reward systems that make effort feel worthwhile go quiet. Depression does not just become possible in this scenario, it becomes almost mathematically inevitable. There is a concept in psychology called learned helplessness, first identified through research by Martin Seligman in the 1960s and 70s. It describes what happens when a person or animal repeatedly experiences situations where their actions have no effect on outcomes. They stop trying. They stop believing that anything they do matters. Now imagine that concept applied to the entirety of existence. Every action you take today will be erased by morning. Every relationship you build, every skill you practice, every moment of growth you experience, gone. The loop resets, and you are back at the beginning. For most people, this would not just be frustrating, it would be existentially shattering. The story you tell yourself about who you are is built on continuity. Take away continuity, and the self begins to dissolve. But here's where it gets genuinely fascinating, because not everyone would unravel. Some people, after moving through the initial disorientation and the psychological darkness, would arrive at something unexpected. A kind of clarity. Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century German philosopher, proposed a thought experiment he called the eternal recurrence. He asked his readers to imagine that they would have to live their life over and over again in exactly the same way for eternity. He did not present this as a punishment. He presented it as the ultimate test of how you are living. If the thought of repeating your life forever fills you with dread, Nietzsche argued, that is a signal. It means you are not living in a way that you truly endorse. But if you could hear that news and feel something close to joy, or at least acceptance, that would mean you had found a way to live that was genuinely worth living. The eternal loop forces a confrontation with a question most of us avoid our entire lives. Is this day, this ordinary, unremarkable, repetitive day, actually enough? Not as a stepping stone to something better, not as a means to an end, but as the thing itself, as the whole point. Here is where the thought experiment becomes uncomfortably personal. If you knew the loop was permanent, what would you actually change about the day? Most people, when they sit with this honestly, realize that the things they would change are not dramatic. They would not suddenly decide to climb mountains or travel to distant countries, because those things require continuity, they require a tomorrow that remembers today, What they would change is smaller and far more significant. They would put the phone down during dinner. They would actually listen when someone is talking to them instead of waiting for their turn to speak. They would spend less time performing and more time being present. They would stop saving the good dishes for special occasions. They would say the thing they have been meaning to say. They would take the walk. They would sit with the discomfort instead of numbing it. They would notice the light. The brutal irony is that none of these changes require a time loop. Every single one of them is available right now in the actual life you are already living. The loop is just a device that strips away the illusion that you have unlimited tomorrows to get it right. There is a reason stories about time loops, from ancient mythology to modern cinema, have always resonated so deeply with human audiences. They are not really about time. They are about attention. They are about what it means to be fully present in a moment that will not last, even though in the loop it technically always does. The Buddhist concept of impermanence teaches that suffering arises not from the fact that things change, but from our resistance to that change, our desperate clinging to permanence. The time loop flips this on its head in a fascinating way. In the loop, nothing changes, and yet the suffering still comes, which tells us something profound. The problem was never really about impermanence. The problem was always about presence. Whether the day repeats or not, whether tomorrow comes or not, the only moment that is ever actually real is the one you are standing in right now. The loop just makes that impossible to ignore. And perhaps that is the hidden gift buried inside the most terrifying version of the scenario. When you cannot escape the present, you are finally forced to inhabit it fully. So what would the perfect loop day actually look like? Not a fantasy day filled with extraordinary events, but a real, livable, sustainable day that you could genuinely return to forever without losing your mind or your soul. It would probably be quiet in the morning. It would involve movement, something physical that connects you to your body. It would include a conversation that actually matters. Not small talk, but real contact with another human being. It would have work in it, not because productivity defines worth, but because meaningful effort is one of the deepest sources of human satisfaction. It would have beauty in it, a piece of music, a view, a moment where you stopped and let something move you. And it would end with enough stillness to reflect, not to plan, not to worry, but simply to register that you were here, that the day happened, that it was real. The extraordinary thing is that this day is not out of reach. It does not require a different life, a different city, a different set of circumstances. It requires a different quality of attention. The loop is already running. It has been running your whole life. The only question that has ever mattered is whether you are actually showing up for it.